Why is it that whenever so many people hear about Islam and Muslims, they think intolerant, angry, and violent? Why can't Muslims from one sect look at Muslims from another sect without hate in their eyes? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, in Surah Al-Imran, verse 103,
And hold firmly together to the rope of Allah, and do not be divided. Remember Allah's favor upon you when you were enemies. Then He united your hearts, so by His grace become brothers. And when you were at the brink of a fiery pit, He saved you from it. This is how Allah makes His revelations clear to you, so that you may be rightly guided.
God tells us to hold on to His rope together and to not be divided. Yet you find that the focus of so many Muslims is to cause as much division as possible. They want to separate us from people of other faiths, separate Muslims of different denominations from each other, and even separate within their own denominations. For example, within Sunni Islam, you have Atharis, Asharis, Deobandis, Hizbis, Ikhwanis, and of course you have the Wahhabis, who literally just hate everyone. But if these people actually paid heed to the book they claim to follow, the book over which ironically they cause all these divisions, they would see that what God actually wants is the complete opposite of what they're doing. I mean, if they would just take a minute out from all the hate, the judgment and intolerance to think to themselves, is this really what God wants from us? Does God really want us to hate and fight each other? It doesn't take much to conclude that that makes no sense. Why would God want some of His creation to suffer at the hands of others, even if they believe that they are right and others need guidance? How does God actually want people to be guided? You think God wants them to be shamed, bullied and pressured into guidance? He literally says in the Quran that there is no compulsion in religion. God says, be united and don't be divided, and then calls upon the Quraysh. He used to hate each other and fight each other to the point that people believed they could never unite. But God calls on them to reflect upon how He favored them by uniting their hearts, and by His grace they became brothers. If this was God's grace and favor to them, and if He's calling upon them to reflect upon it, what do you think is the message that God wants us to take from that reflection? He describes the relationship of hate, animosity and infighting as a pit of fire from which He saved them. That's how God describes division and hate, as a pit of fire. And then He says this is how He makes His signs clear to you. God describes the transition from hate and infighting to unity as one of His clear signs to us. So just let that sink in for a moment. Now just imagine that we exerted all of the energy and effort we do into refuting, judging and hating one another who differs from us, into uniting and building bridges. Imagine what kind of impact that would have. Imagine what kind of world we could create. There's a quote that I absolutely love by Nikola Tesla. He says, "We are all one. Only egos, beliefs and fears separate us." How true is that?